ask Nicole to take roll call, please.
Bodie,
Here.
Carberry Montgomery,
Here.
Rosendahl.
Here.
Okay, great.
Okay. Is there a motion to approve the agenda?
So moved.
So moved.
Motion by Carberry
Second.
Montgomery, second by Rosendahl. Discussion, roll call.
Carberry Montgomery,
Yes.
Rosendahl,
Yes.
Bodie.
Yes.
Thank you.
All right, and we'll move on to the regular agenda item, which is to review the Urbandale Municipal Code. So who is going to start us off?
Yes, thank you, Mayor and members of council. City Attorney Brownell is going to get us started today on with our presentation or our information. So I'll hand it over to Maria.
Hi, everyone.
All right, thank you, Maria. Welcome.
Yes, hi, thank you. Thanks for letting me join you. This is my first lunch and learn with you all, so thanks for letting me be here. I've been working with Nicole and staff on the city code updates for several months now. And so we thought we would start just by kind of giving you just setting the table, giving you some general background on, why where we're at now, and that'll help explain some of the phase one changes that Nicole is going to deep dive into here shortly. So one of the things you're going to see as front and center is that the codification editor who was asked to assist with this code update focused on citations. And just a word about that and why that was a focus is that there are Urbandale has been incorporated since 1917, I think. So over the course of that many years, there have been many code updates and a lot of changes to Iowa law in the meantime. It used to be, of course, that cities could not pass any ordinance unless the state legislature expressly gave the city permission to do so. So some of those citations you see may be relics of what we call Dillon's rule, which is that the cities can't pass legislation that the legislature hasn't permitted them to pass. And so some of them may just be legislative history cites to the city's prior authority in adopting a local ordinance on a certain subject. So some of that is for that purpose. Other times there's a citation you'll see that is more of a cross-reference to a state code. It may just be that the city wanted to incorporate by reference certain state laws, and in earlier days under state law, the city would be able to just cite to the state law that the city wanted to incorporate by reference, and that would be sufficient. Now, Chapter 380 requires that the city make a specific statement that it is incorporating by reference a specific state law. So the codification editor needed some guidance on what exactly these citations are meant for, and what the city wants to do going forward, so that maintaining the code going forward is not quite so tedious a task, because the codification editor will be looking to those citations to determine whether there needs to be any changes to maintain consistency with state law, or whether those citations really aren't substantively important at all and they don't need to use them. So that was part one of this little project. And Chapter 380 requires that the city enact and maintain a city code of ordinances. And there's some specific rules about maintaining that code. And so really this discussion is part of that larger duty to maintain the code, maintain it every 5 years at a minimum. Urbandale does even better than that, and it's updated annually. But for this particular project, we're looking at holistically what are some changes that need to happen in the code to make it either more consistent with state law as state laws have changed, and maybe the ordinances that cite to or incorporate those statutes haven't caught up, or make the code a little bit easier to maintain going forward. So I guess I will pause there. I think Nicole has some notes on some specific changes that we're looking at, and she'll be able to lay out the process and timeline as well. And overall, this is going to make the code a whole lot cleaner. It's going to make updating it a whole lot easier and less time consuming going forward. And it's just going to be a really good thing for the city. So I'll pause there, and I'm here for questions too, because we've been traveling this journey together a little bit, Nicole and I. So I'll punt it to you, Nicole, for more detailed discussion.
Excellent. Yes. So when you look at the Appendix A, so the summary of changes, you'll notice that the first overview focuses a lot on the difference between these legislative histories and the statutory references. So as Marie mentioned, that was kind of our first stop, was this research report. They provided us back a very thorough 75-page report with 95 items, some very small and some maybe a little bit larger. And so we did go through line by line, kind of going through each chapter and each point that they brought up to identify what needed to happen with each part of those. So when we talk about, I learned a lot also about how the citations are in our code. So it was quite an experience. But the legislative histories are times when we're citing the code verbatim or near verbatim. And that helps them to be able to identify, okay, if there's wording changes in state code that we need to update, it makes it a lot easier to identify what those updates need to be. The alternative is these statutory references. And so the statutory references, what it will look like at the end of the day is them adding the word "C" into the code when we're just merely referencing that this is where we get the authority from, or this is, what we're following as kind of the intent is the same and it matches, the legality matches, but it might not be verbatim. And so those don't have to be reviewed as closely for word comparisons, which will really help our future selves. We've talked about a lot in this process, is that our future selves will be very grateful for the work that we're doing today to make future changes a little bit easier. So we'll look at, I wanted to highlight just about 5 highlights in the Appendix A. Really you'll notice several things in the red line version that are those clerical type of updates where we're updating maybe a code reference that the chapter changed or was corrected. And so any of the red lines are in addition to the legislative history to statutory reference changes that we're talking about. So the first one I would highlight is just an example in the general provisions and the municipal infractions. There's a couple of examples there where we're, instead of changing to a statutory reference, we're going to maintain it as legislative history and change the language in the code to be verbatim and match and correct the mismatch that way. So we did have a few of those that we kept, and it is, from what we found, consistent with other ways that cities maintain their code, that some of them will remain as legislative histories and some will move to the statutory reference. In Chapter 30, we had, I would highlight the 3009, where we noted that we're updating the text to match the state code. That way we're keeping this as a legislative history, but the change there is the number of days we have to make an appointment to a city council vacancy. So state code changed to 60 days. Our code currently says 40 days. So it felt appropriate, and certainly would take your feedback on that to just have it match. I think we have got a great process and we try to be efficient and to get that done as quickly as possible. Then in 30.11, we also did some update kind of to match our current operations. So we didn't have marketing and communications in there listed as a department. Finance and records represented the clerk's office as well, and so we split out kind of the finance and then the records and the clerk's duties into separate, and added the city manager as well in that part. So that was just kind of a staff-initiated cleanup on our current operations. Under administration, I would highlight the citation, those first 2 notes where we added citations to the city ordinance. And on this one, I want to make a pretty big shout out to our deputy clerk, Angie. She did a lot of research and sifted through a lot of old resolutions and ordinances to find the correct reference there to circle that back. Again, no change in practice, just something the codifier had noted that we didn't have a complete reference where we could trace our history back all the way to when we updated to having 4-year terms. So that was just a small cleanup item that, again, our future selves, if anyone were to ask the question, we now have kind of the ability to trace that back. And the police department in chapter 33, the 33.2, the police chief appointment, as a mayor council form of government, there were actually 2 different code sections in the state code that covered that, and one directed back to our ordinances and had then a however statement, right? So we just are clarifying, really, again, clarifying we're already operating this way, but just clarifying that that appointment is subject to the consent of the majority of the council so that we give ourselves a good guidebook the next time we have an appointment of that nature. Let's see. In the last one I was going to highlight is in chapter 160. So we had those several places in the land use code or in the zoning code that had some obsolete language. I know that was something that had been highlighted by council that needed to be addressed. So while additional changes in the zoning code will come forward from the department themselves, and we do need to go through, we'll have some other steps where we touch it, we felt it was important enough to make sure we completed that part of that chapter in this first round of changes and updates. So I would pause there and say, is there anything either that I've highlighted that you have questions on, or that we didn't highlight that you had questions on being included in this first phase?
I guess I haven't been super involved in this process. I think Joe has taken the lead on that. But under chapter 37, city elections, I know we made a major change at some point in my tenure on the council, getting rid of the primary provision. So I'm assuming that that's just been taken care. I mean, if stuff's been put in the code or updated and it's fine, then we're not doing anything with it.
Correct.
Okay,
yes.
so these are just things that have become obsolete or outdated or missed for the most part. Okay.
Yes. A good example in the 3628, which is under the fire department, that the N and O, those corrections on that code reference, so the state actually moved the entirety of that piece to a different chapter number. And so it's just, that happened just back within the last year or two. And so it's just catching those smaller things where something like that has changed, primarily.
Okay.
Absolutely.
That's what I thought, but I just wanted to make sure, because that's one thing I know that we changed.
Yes. So those are already, we send those as they're passed, we send them to the codifier and they get updated on our website relatively quickly. And then we do printed supplements 3 to 4 times a year.
Okay, thank you.
And with those, when we're doing the statutory reference and legislative history updates, is there some sort of tagging or listening, what the proper term would be, to what the legislature is changing to basically say, like proactively be like, all right, these were the chapters and sections that were modified as part of the last session. Are we able to then basically quick check, I don't know, like a quick find of these are the places that are at least referenced in our code that hit those areas, like as kind of a proactive cleanup going forward?
I would
I don't know
say
if what-
that's a really great note for me to take. When we look through building out this process, into the future. So we do have a few things that we've noted. I'll give you the example. We do that enacting ordinance every year that says, okay, over the last year we've had all of these, and we're just making a statement saying these are all incorporated into the code, officially adopted. As part of that annual process, we plan to bring forward the zoning map so that an updated zoning map gets incorporated into that every single year. And then we plan on also bringing the street map through that process, that annual process. So certainly something to put on the radar. Generally each department is looking at as closely as they can when those legislative changes come in, but I don't know that we have anything in place quite yet that really document those. But I love that idea, and certainly something for us to tag on that annual process, if not before.
And I just want to make a note that I appreciate I know a lot of this is like kind of in the weeds statutory updates and things like that, but I do really appreciate the attention put toward the obsolete language. I think that's a valuable quick it can do, and I really appreciate that.
Certainly. All right, any other questions on, I know there's a lot of, it feels in some ways like a lot of just very minor details in some of this, but again, our future selves will be grateful for it, and we feel like we're designing a process to identify these on a more regular basis and make it kind of part of our routine, which I really like. And we've learned a lot through the process as well in the clerk's office. So, right, so where do we go from here? So our next steps to codify the changes that we have put in front of you today, we'll put together ordinances with Maria, and that'll codify the changes, and then those would go, once those are approved, those would go to the codifier, and they'll make all the changes in the code for us. We are targeting that first meeting in December, just to give us a little more time to have those, do a thorough review, make sure we have everything in these pieces documented appropriately, and working with the codifier and how they'd like to receive that. And then we plan for a phase 2 to go through a red line of the remaining chapters in a similar format to this. So providing an appendix that would go through the overview of those changes and highlighting anything, any wording changes or any red line changes there. And then also a second appendix that will go through the statutory reference legislative history piece as well. And then the third piece to this, which is really the part that will be maybe more meaningful to you all, is the department-specific updates on some of their chapters. Now, we have had a few of those come through already. The franchise fees, the fireworks is one that's come through already that kind of beat the phase 1 through the process. But I know that there's a lot of work being done on the franchise fees pieces, the civil rights. We have some within our liquor licensing that we're working on, and then open records would be some examples of ones that'll come through more so through the departments to you through their process that have either been identified or we've provided some additional context. I thank you to City Attorney Brownell and her team for a lot of research. We got a great research from the codifier and some great in-depth research from her team as well. So those will come through, maybe not specifically identified as part of this project, but certainly with some input from it. So.
May I ask kind of a general question, and it might be for Maria, and I'm not sure whether it's really relevant at this stage of the game, but I think we're all concerned that some of what seems to be our more fundamental rights for local control have been eroded, if you will, at least in part, by legislative action. And I'm wondering, to what extent do we ever look at these things with the constitutional amendment for home rule in mind? And is there any way we highlight or make note of or care about the implications of that on our code? Not saying that we shouldn't make these changes and be in alignment with the legislature, but is there a way to track what's there that's unsettling for the future?
Yes, certainly. I think that would be handled certainly on a subject by subject basis, ordinance by ordinance basis. And the way we can reflect that certain changes are made due to legislative preemption is simply, one way we've done that is enumerating that in the ordinance itself that updates our ordinances is in those whereas clauses, just stating real clearly, this is why the city is required to make this change because it's been preempted. And that then becomes part of the city's record. Another way you could do it, again, depending on the specific state legislative change, is those statutory references that the codification editor will be including. So anytime there is a change to state law that may impact an ordinance, tracing that back to the state law that made that change can be listed in the ordinance as a non-substantive but cross-reference to the legislative history. Those are a couple of ways we could do it.
So as a follow-up
Great.
to that, with the fireworks changes that we had to make, I think this summer, does it say whereas the state legislature is making us do this? This is the law, I mean, this is what our requirements are, or lack of requirements?
I don't recall us including that in the code language itself, but I do believe it was maybe memorialized through the council letter.
Well, I
language a little bit,
memorialized
but-
some comments, but
I'm
I
pretty
just,
sure
I,
there was something.
that's one particularly touchy one for me.
I'm pretty sure it was there was some whereases in the ordinance from like a public safety and whatnot perspective.
I can look too and let you know for sure. I just don't recall offhand.
I mean, it's not that big of a deal. I mean, we did what we had to do, but I guess, is that an example of one where we would do something along those lines of spelling that out, or we just say, this is the state code?
I think actually we did memorialize that. Now pulling up that ordinance, that the first whereas includes on May 19, 2025, the governor signed Senate File 303, which prohibits cities from limiting the use of fireworks on July 3rd, 4th, and December 31st.
So we get it in there a little bit.
Little bit.
Usually that's my practice when I'm drafting ordinances, because otherwise cities have the authority to exercise any function deemed in the welfare of the community, unless the legislature has preempted us. So usually if that's the case, we try to enumerate that front and center, that, hey, we're now limited, we're recognizing that limitation even under home rule, and here's what the amendment is to comply with that.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thank you.
Well, I certainly appreciate your time and your support and your patience as we work through this project. And that's all I have for you today, unless you have additional questions.
Can I ask an unrelated question to David? You had indicated last week that there was some discussions at Polk County related to food pantry donations. Do you have an update on that?
I do. They met last week, I can't remember the day, maybe Thursday, in a special meeting and appropriated $1 million for 3 organizations. And I have the details on that. I talked to Frank on Friday, and I can share that out
Okay.
in writing to the council, but they did meet and they did essentially make an appropriation of $1 million to increase the food supply for food
So I'm
pantries.
assuming that will trickle down specifically some of it to the Urbandale Food
Yes.
Pantry. Okay.
Two of the my understanding is two of the organizations.
Okay.
And we'll try to get more details.
Okay, great.
But yes, the $1 million was funded last week. And then there's been some movement legislatively too at the federal level. So we're watching that as well.
Thank you.
David, I think related to the topic of this call, I had a couple of questions, but they're not related specifically to like anything that we need to change right here. I think they would be more just questions or like future, like the department function updates that we talked about as next steps. So we can talk about that later, but
All right, anything further? For the good of the order today?
Get some of your.
All right, well, thank you, Maria, thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Good to see you.
thank you.
Thank you.
With that, we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a good rest of the day. We'll see a lot of you at 4 o'clock. So.
You bet.
Yes, excellent.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye.